let me introduce myself. I'm Phil Benson. I'm the conference chair and the director of the Multilingualism Research Centre at Macquarie University, which is hosting the conference. I'm the conference chair, but next to me on the screen is Chloe Castle, who's actually done all the real work. So I want to acknowledge her. So I want to begin, as we do, with a welcome to country from the university. So I'm just going to share my screen and play a short video welcoming you to the Macquarie University campus. Can we see that?
Yes.
Okay, I hope this works.
I see trees of green.
No, it doesn't. We'll go the wrong video. Apologies for that.
Welcome. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of Macquarie University land, the Warramadigal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured this land since the Dreamtime. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. We welcome people of all nations and all faiths. Waibidja, Jamna Payala Janawi. Come here, we speak together. We have 60,000 years of archaeological evidence of Aboriginal habitation at Lake Mungo and 20,000 years in Ryde. We have great antiquity. Today, hundreds of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people graduate from Macquarie University. The Darug Nation had famous leaders such as Chief Yarramundi, Narrabinji, Colby and Maria Locke. Many of the descendants of these Darug people live today amongst you. We celebrate with you our ongoing attachment and custodianship of this country. We celebrate the achievements of Macquarie University.
Okay, that's a welcome from the university. I would also like to acknowledge on behalf of the conference organizing group and presenters and attendees from Macquarie University, the traditional custodians of the Macquarie University land, the Warramadigal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the Dreamtime. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future, and we also pay our respects to any Indigenous Australians who are attending the conference. And I want to add personally that this land was also taken by force and has never been ceded. Okay, so welcome. I want to briefly just say something about the Multilingualism Research Centre and then a little bit about the conference, and I'm going to hand over to Chloe to explain just a little bit about how things work. The Multilingualism Research Centre has existed at Macquarie as a research group since 2016, and we have been a faculty research centre since 2019. We're currently a research centre within the Faculty of Medicine, Health and Human Sciences due to faculty reorganisations, but we're mainly supported by the departments of linguistics and also the School of Education in the Faculty of Arts. We're highly disciplinary, and we hope that's reflected in the contents of, well, in fact, I'm sure it's reflected in the contents of the conference and our selection of keynote speakers. Macquarie has 4 faculties and we have members in all 4 of those faculties. One of our main goals is to encourage researchers across the disciplines to factor language and multilingualism into their research, even when their research is not directly about language. We want to encourage and help them to include language in their research as a factor, particularly research in Australia, and hence the theme of this conference, the value of languages in a multicultural world. If I could just share my screen again briefly. if you would like to know more about us, please go and visit the, sorry, what can you see there? I think I'm sharing the wrong screen.
Just a thin line, Phil.
Sorry?
It was just a thin line. It didn't show the full.
Yeah, I was sharing. I don't know what, I seem to be sharing the wrong screen. I won't share the screen. You've all visited the Multilingual Sydney website, actually, when you registered and when you submitted abstracts, if you submitted abstracts for the conference, but when you registered. So if you want to know more about us, and especially if you want to download all sorts of free reports and papers that we've posted up there, please do so. It's a very easy to remember. It's called Multilingual Sydney, and it's multilingualsydney.org. Very simple name and URL. Okay, so this conference is one of the commitments that we made when we became a faculty research centre in 2019. Of course, it wasn't supposed to be an online conference. When we planned it, I'd never even heard of an online conference. And we all know what happened to commitments that were made in 2019. A lot of them have sort of disappeared with the pandemic, but I'm very, very proud of our team for keeping to this commitment to organize this conference during what's been a very difficult time for everybody in universities over the past 2 years, and also for multilingual individuals in Australia and all over the world, I think. So I'm looking forward to the conference. Despite all the difficulties, we've got 6 excellent keynote speakers over the 3 days. The keynote speaker begins each session. I think we've got around 80 parallel 80 presentations in parallel sessions around that. I'm really excited about it, and I'm hoping to attend as many of those as I can and encourage you to do the same. Our aim was to have an international conference, and we stuck to that aim. Of course, that's very difficult in the online format due to different time zones. Unfortunately, we're not international to the extent that we can include North America or South America, simply because the time zone difference is too difficult. But we are as international as we can be, with participants who are really stretched out from New Zealand over to the United Kingdom. I don't know how many countries, but quite a number of countries are represented at the conference. You'll notice that we have 2 evening sessions on Tuesday and Wednesday. And the reason for that, of course, is to accommodate European presenters and participants. I'm expecting that we don't have too many European participants at the moment, but I can see one, Tobias. Toby, thanks for making it late at night from Germany. So Tuesday and Wednesday evening, although they may be a bit inconvenient for Australian participants, they're going to be really good sessions because we're going to have a good representation from Europe during those sessions. And lastly, before the Tuesday and Wednesday keynotes, we have presentations from 2 of the leading publishers on multilingualism, who are Multilingual Matters and Routledge. So please make time for those 2 sessions. And somewhere on the SCED, on the homepage of the SCED program, there is a button that, what does it say, Chloe? Does it say flyers or discount flyers?
Discount flyers.
Discount flyers. So those 2 publishers have very generously given us a code for discounts for conference participants. So go and have a look what they have on offer in terms of literature on multilingualism. Okay, so I'm excited about this. So before I carry on talking into Alice's keynote presentation, I'm just going to hand over to Chloe, who's got a couple of minutes that she wants to announce things. And could you introduce the moderators, Chloe? Sorry.
Oh, yeah, sure. Okay, so I haven't actually pinned you guys because it would have had you on the same spot as Bill when he was talking. So if you just want to say hi, so that you'll come up. So we've got Crystal or Yongju Lee.
Hi.
We've got Sun.
Hi.
We've got Josh.
Morning, everyone.
And we've got Tegu.
Hello, everyone.
So these guys
So
will
the
be your
moderators will be helping to manage the parallel sessions, especially. So you'll meet them in those parallel sessions.
Yeah,
Hello,
they'll be there to help. No worries. Okay, so yeah, hi everyone, and a warm welcome to our Value of Languages in a Multicultural World conference. As you probably know by now, my name is Chloe and I'm the conference secretary and also research assistant to the Multilingualism Research Centre. First of all, I'd really like to thank everyone who made this conference come together. It's been a great effort and it has been wonderful to be a part of this team. This includes our MRC conference committee, MRC members, chairs, moderators, keynotes, presenters, publishers, and of course our attendees. So thank you. Now for a few details on how things will run throughout the conference. Everything will be available through Sched, which hopefully everyone has managed to log into. You'll notice that you're able to create your own schedule on Sched by ticking the sessions that you'd like to attend. As you may have figured out by now, to enter a session, simply click on the session on the main Sched page and then click the Enter Session button. This will take you to the Zoom room for the session. If you're a speaker or a chair, please aim to get to your session on time and our moderators will make you a co-host. If you run into any major issues with these things, you can always email us at multilingualsydney@gmail.com or alternately send a private message to the moderator for your session. And each of us will have moderator next to our name, so you'll be able to see that easily. As you'll see on your schedule, we will be having 6 keynote sessions throughout the conference, which go for 1 hour each, followed by 15 minutes of a more casual mingle with the plenary session. The session chairs will formally end the session after 1 hour, and then attendees can either choose to take a break or stay and chat with the plenary. We also have 4 parallel sessions throughout most of the conference, along with talks from 2 major multilingualism publishers, Routledge and Multilingual Matters. We have several breaks throughout, during which time you can get some food, have a break, or even choose to contact people you might like to collaborate with. Speaking of which, if you wish to have people be able to contact you for possible collaborations from the conference, please ensure that your contact information is available on your Sched profile. Please also make sure that your profile is set to public. This just means public to the conference members rather than to the general public. All available pre-recorded talks are now available on Sched on the presentation pages. So if you miss a talk or you have a clash, you can always watch the talk later. These talks will be accessible for 1 month after the conference. Thank you everyone and enjoy the conference. So now I think I could probably hand over to Peter Roger, who will be chairing the session for Associate Professor Alice Chik. So Peter, I've made you a co-host as well.
Thank you very much, Chloe. And wow, it's exactly 10 o'clock. And it's my very great honor to be chairing this first plenary session given by Associate Professor Alice Chik, who I know very well from Macquarie University. Many of you would know Alice's work, but in case you're less familiar with her work in this area, Alice is an associate professor in the School of Education at Macquarie University, and she has, I guess, 2 main research areas. One examines language learning and multilingual literacies in digital environments, and in this space, she's published a great deal. And I must say that I've used a number of her publications in subjects that I teach at Macquarie, and I always find them so interesting. And it's all the more fun because they're written by someone local to the university and someone I know very well. But I guess Alice's other area of research is in sort of multilingualism in the public space. So public discourse about multilingualism, narratives about multilingual experience, representation, And I remember shortly after Alice came to Macquarie, she gave a presentation in which she was talking about language education in schools in New South Wales in Australia, and talking about the kind of idea that multilingualism sometimes was presented as something that happens out there. So it's not in our classroom, but it's something you have to go out and experience. Whereas for many of the children in the classroom, of course, multilingualism is a day-to-day reality. And that stuck with me because I'd never really thought of it that way before. But ever since that, I've seen more and more that that's often the case. And I think the kind of work that we do hopefully helps to change that way of thinking. So without further taking up time, I'd like to welcome Associate Professor Alice Chik as our first plenary speaker. And she's going to be talking on the topic of societal multilingualism in Sydney and the implications for individuals. Thank you, Alice.
Well, thank you, Peter, for the very generous introductions. And good morning, everybody. Is everybody seeing my screen right now?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, so I'm just going to start the share screen. Okay, good morning, everybody. And again, thank you to the Multilingualism Research Center for this kind invitation, and also especially to Dr. Chloe Castle for her support over the conference organization. So my name is Alice Chik from the Macquarie School of Education, and I'm speaking from Macquarie University campus, the direct line in Sydney. And I hope you and your families and friends are keeping safe and well. So in this talk, I would like to invite you to think about the value of languages in a multicultural world through the lenses of visibility, access, and capacity there. So when we're thinking about these three lenses of visibility, capacity, and access, then I'm looking at capacity is about language skills, our attitude towards languages, and our confidence in using languages. The visibility is about how many languages and how much of them we see and hear and how we contribute to a multilingual environment. And access is about where and how our languages enable us to access resources, and these include language educations, for example. So this is a project in progress with a number of members in the Multilingualism Research Center. So I'm presenting some thought on this, ideas about languages and capacities, visibilities, and access there. So now I will discuss that in the context of Australia. When we think about Australia, we tend to think of a multicultural Australia. Right? And particularly that every time we hear about Australia, we say that, oh, we're very multicultural. But the thing is that multiculturalism also means multilingualism, as illustrated by an infographics from Services Australia. It's a federal government agency. So we see that we actually need a bilingual or maybe multilingual workforce, especially in the public service sector. When the Australian population is multicultural and multilingual, there are still many misrepresentations about languages in Australia. Okay, so let's start with an online entry from the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, I would like you to read this entry for languages of Australia. Okay, it's taken directly from the website, and I'm just going to show you the entries with my highlight, not original highlight, my highlight and emphasis on this. So thinking about English is not Australia's official language, almost is universally spoken. Aboriginal languages, many have become extinct. There are very few speakers, only about 50,000 of them. And the language of immigrants are most notably Chinese, Italian, and Greek. Now, there's a lot to unpack in this entry. And I will respectfully leave the knowledge about Aboriginal languages to Professor Jill Bond, who will be giving her plenary later today. But I want to unpack 3 language myths in this entry with the 2016 census data. We have just completed 2021 census data, and then the data will only be available from June 2022. Okay, so first of all, about the English language in Australia, only 72.7% of Australian households speak only English at home. That's from the 2016 census. With the Australian Indigenous languages, there are only 50,000 speakers. From the census, we know that 65,837 Australians stated that they spoke an Australian Indigenous language at home. So there must be more than 50,000 people who know one or more Australian languages. With the migrant languages, are the most notable Chinese, Italian, and Greek? Yes and no. The 3 most commonly spoken languages other than English at home in Australia are actually Chinese, including Mandarin and Cantonese, Arabic, and Vietnamese. Now, Italian and Greek were the 4th and the 5th most commonly spoken languages at home. So if we are looking at a number of misalignment of information about languages in Australia, we might want to ask these questions. First, is Australia multilingual? If yes, how is it multilingual? And then how is multilingualism perceived? How is it maintained? And how can we support multilingualism? Okay. So let's start with the question, is Australia multilingual? Okay. The quick answer is yes. According to the 2016 census, 20.8% of Australian households, and that's the national average, spoke a language other than English at home. And it was an increase from 18.2% in 2011 census. Okay. And the figure is actually much higher in capital cities like Sydney and Melbourne. The average figures for a capital city is 27.8%. This may mean that the regional areas of Australia are not as multilingual as the metropolitan areas, but this is going to be a very complicated question, and I will come back to this very shortly. Okay. It is not only between 2011 and 2016 that we have seen an increase. We're actually seeing that between 2001 to 2016. Okay, so from the excellent work from Field, and that we actually have some information that look at that it is not just the percentage of the total population has increased, okay, that speak that language other than English at home, but we're also seeing a sheer number increase. So we're looking at that increase from 2.8 million in 2001 to 4.85 million. That's a huge number. Okay? That's a huge numbers there. Now, okay, now that we have established there is a significant proportion of the population speak a language other than English at home, the next question is, how is Australia multilingual? Okay. One explanation frequently used by the Australian government is that Australia is a migrant country, with only 2.8% of Australians identified as Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander. Almost all Australians are migrants or descendants of migrants. As you can see from this government infographics, that in 2016, 28.4% of the populations were born overseas, 20.9% were second generations with at least one parent born overseas, and half of the population is third plus generation of migrant. That means at least one grandparent was born overseas. Okay. Then the question is, what languages do migrants speak? Okay. From the 2016 census, the most commonly spoken languages are Mandarin, Arabic, Cantonese, Vietnamese, Italian, Greek, Filipino, Hindi, Spanish, and Punjabi. And Indian languages speech communities are the fastest growing community. Between 2021 and 2016, it is fair to say that Asian and Middle Eastern languages, broadly speaking, are fast becoming the most commonly spoken languages in the household. Comparatively speaking, European languages have dropped, simply because of the proportions of population speaking the languages. Then this raises another question. Where did the migrant come from? We have more recent data from 2020 from the Australian Bureau of Statistics. The top 10 countries of birth for migrants are all from multilingual countries. And the most recent migrants are most likely to be of Asian heritages as well. So Australia is becoming more multilingual and shifting from a European-oriented multilingualism to a globally oriented multilingualism. It's not just European languages anymore. The question then is, are we looking at a societal multilingualism yet? Okay. When we think about societal multilingualism, the European Commission actually define it as the ability of society, institutions, groups, and individuals to engage on a regular basis with more than one language in their everyday or day-to-day lives. Arnott and Singleton actually say that like multilingualism is spread across classes, professions, and activities across geographical, social, and mediums, so that not just one language is used, but more than one language is used on an everyday basis there. So how is multilingualism actually being perceived in Australia? Let's start with the Australian government perspective. Okay? On the government website that introduces Australia to the rest of the world, okay? So we start with this really grand sentence: is Australia is multicultural. Coming back to the question of multicultural and multiracial, and this is reflected in the country's food, lifestyle, and cultural practices and experience. The word language is not included. It's actually absent in the introductions, particularly when they talk about migrant. The interesting thing when they talk about the migrant and the languages is that there was a discussion of a historical dictation test that was abolished in 1958. That was a long time ago. Okay? And there was actually no discussion on contemporary multilingualism in Australia. But cultures have been mentioned multiple times. So with the government, when we're looking at Australia becoming more multilingual, we're not having an official language, then are we only looking at Australia being multicultural? And what does that mean? Okay. Well, it is actually quite true, because with the Australian government, that we do have a multicultural policy. The most recent multicultural statement was published in 2018 by the former Prime Minister Malcolm Turnbull. It's available in 32 languages. The current government, Morrison government, has not released a new multicultural statement. Okay, so officially, we do have multicultural statement that outlines a government's approach to multiculturalism, how it regulates the roles of languages in public service sectors. And the question you're going to say is like, wait a minute, a multicultural policy is not the same as a language policy. You're absolutely correct. Indirectly, we do have a language policy in the sense that, for example, in 2007, that the Australian Citizenship Act was introduced by the Howard government, okay, that has actually given English an official national status. Okay. So if you want to apply for a visa to visit or study or live or work in Australia, you will have to sign and accept the Australian values statement. And within the Australian values statement, there's one part that say the English language as the national language and as an important unifying element of Australian society. Okay. No other languages have been given the same status. Okay. And so in 2017, with the Australian Citizenship Act, that it was actually introduced for the first time, there has to be a new test, okay, that require for all Australian citizenships applications. Okay. So this comes and as a very simple 20 multiple choice question based on Australian history, cultures, and values contained in a resource booklet. Yes, you can study for the test, and you have to answer all 5 of the Australian value question correctly, get a mark of 75% or above, and that includes the 5 Australian value questions answered correctly. The test is written in simple English. Okay? There's no translation, and it cannot be taken in any other languages. Okay? So remember the dictation test that was abolished in 1958? The new citizenship test is implicitly a de facto assessment of English language skills. Okay? So now take a look at 3 practice questions from the Australian Department of Home Affairs. Okay, so I'm sure some of you will be able to answer all the questions. For example, the first one, what do we commemorate on Anzac Days? Okay, so this is about the history. And which of these is an example of equality in Australia? So you have an Australian values questions. And then there's also one interesting practice question, okay, here. Should people in Australia make an effort to learn English? Okay, you have to choose the question very, very carefully. Okay, so now, it is not a coincidence that a sampled practice question will be about learning English in Australia, because over the last several years, that there actually has been struggles about introducing more rules and possibly regulations about English as a national language or maybe an official language in Australia there. Okay. So for example, in 2017, there was a proposal that additional English requirement should be required to for all citizen or permanent resident visa applicants. So the proposal was that the applicant should have an IELTS level 6 or equivalent, okay, in their before they can apply. Okay, so the opposition leader Tony Burke say that that is ridiculous because an IELTS level 6 is almost the same as a university entrance requirement. Okay. And this is actually quite true. And there's actually quite a lot of talk about if we pick up an average Australians, many of them would not be able to pass an IELTS level 6 because it's a specific way of testing English competence there. Okay, well, that was scrapped. Okay, it didn't happen. But what happened was that there was an update to the 2020 citizenship test that it's being framed on government website that the citizenship test is not just about knowing or become knowledgeable about Australia as a country. You want to be a citizen, but you also have to demonstrate a basic knowledge of the English language. So this is actually taken straight from the government website. There's an understanding of what it means to become an Australian citizen and adequate knowledge of Australia and the responsibility and privileges of citizenship and commitments to Australian values based on freedom, respect, and equality. So the new part is that now have to include the passing of that 5 questions on Australian values. Okay. So now, the Liberal government didn't get to pass their English requirement. Okay. in 2017. Okay? So they tried again in 2020, but this time is slightly different. So Ellen Touch, there was then the acting minister for immigration, citizenship, migrant services and multicultural affairs, say that you want to settle in Australia, they should make reasonable efforts to learn English. So now this time they are targeting not the main visa applicant or holder. Okay, they are looking at the partner's visa, that they proposed an IELTS level 4 from late 2021. Okay? As of last week, I checked, there was no specific requirement, but if people are applying from overseas, they will need to demonstrate IELTS level 4. And IELTS was excited. They actually have a specific website for people to prepare for the partner's visa compliance of IELTS level 4. And one of the interesting things is that when Peter Dutton talks about the proposed migrant English requirements, and then preparing for the partner visa requirements on radio, that he said that it's actually no brainer. It is providing support for women who in some cultures are treated equally. And we want those women to have an education, see their daughters to get the driver's license, whatever it might be. And then he also say passing the language on, the English language, not the home language, on to their daughters. Okay, so the interesting thing is that for migrants in Australia, in some part of the government or some government officials do not have a strong positive view of the people speaking different languages. It's a deficit view that if a person speaks a language other than English, there is an assumption that their English is not good enough, right? Particularly when it talks about women. Okay? Now, the policy oriented towards the social value of English and English only, particularly think about social cohesion. And at the same time, reducing the visibility of multilingualism in a multicultural society. That is like, stop talking about other languages. Talk about English, whether you can speak good English or not. Now, this is what the government said. Okay? But for the other part of the government, who knows about economies, who knows about money, who knows about workforce, they're looking at skills in languages, not just English, but languages other than English, also create economic values. Okay, so this is from Austrade. These are the people who knows about economic values, okay, of our society, of our workforce, of every sectors of Australia. So they released an annual benchmark report. Why Australia? It's basically trying to get overseas company, overseas investor to put their money in Australia, invest in it here, open a company, open a branch, headquarters here. So this is a report that talks about what is the good things, what are some of the good things about Australia, okay? And one thing that they has been keeping this persistently over the last 5 years is talking about migrant and a multilingual workforce. Okay? The migrants contribute directly to Australian trade with their intercultural understanding and vital language skill, especially in Asian languages. They're not saying that, well, our migrants don't speak English good enough. They are saying that they have other language skills. Okay? So it's not just about English. Okay? Now, then the question is, sorry. We cannot rely on importing language skills through migrants, because right after the COVID, that there's actually a global based for migrants, and that is actually from yesterday's news, that we may not be as competitive as other countries like Germany and Canada or even the UK in attracting migrants globally. Okay, so how do we build language capacities here? Okay, so for example, during lockdown, one of the most popular activity is actually learning a new language. So 2021, the Duolingo country report is actually quite interesting. Is that what languages are Australian learning? French was the most popular language to study in 2021, ahead of number 2, Spanish, but Spanish pulled ahead to number 1 in 2020. So this year, French is back on top. It should be 2021, sorry. Okay. So Australia is learning French. Why French there? And they talk about that family and cultures drive learners to study new languages. Now, of course, we cannot just rely on Duolingo and informal language education to maintain the language capacity or to expand our language capacities as a national strategies. So before I get any further to the provisions of language education, let's refresh information about the most commonly spoken languages in Australia and Sydney. Okay, so the most commonly spoken languages are Chinese, Arabic, Vietnamese, Italian, and Greek. Okay, so I'm just looking at the top 5. Okay. The most current figures that we have, the most current figures for year 12 Australian students enrolled in languages was from 2019. We haven't received the information from 2020 yet. The national figures, only about 10% of the students enrolled in a language subject. Okay. In the late 1960s, we're looking at about 44%. That's from Joe LoBianco to figures that almost half of the population will take a language other than English in the secondary school for their final year exam. Okay. There was a change in 1968. There was the removal of language for university entrance requirement. Okay. From that point onwards, it's like, that student thinks that like as long as there's no university entrance requirement, the figures have been dropping nationally to 2019 at 10.3%. Okay. That's the lowest amount all learning areas, English, math, humanities, and social sciences. Okay. What does it mean? So our students are simply not learning languages, or not enough of the students are learning languages. Okay. For the students who are learning languages, what languages are they learning? Okay. In the last several years, that's the most popular have been Chinese, Japanese, and French, okay, nationally. And now that is quite interesting. That is very different from the most commonly spoken languages in the country. Okay. Let's take a look at closer to New South Wales and Sydney as well there. The language diversity in New South Wales public school. Okay. In 2016 census, 31% of the New South Wales household general population speak a language other than English. Okay. Now by 2010, almost 30% of all public school students, including kindergarten, primary, and secondary, already come from households that speak a language other than English. In 2020, we're looking at 36.9% of all New South Wales school students come from language background other than English household. In Metropolitan Sydney, we're looking at 56.2%. So what does that mean? It means that when a teacher goes into a classroom in Sydney, more than half of his or her class is living in households that speak a language other than English. And what languages do our students speak? They are more likely, particularly younger students, they are more likely to speak one of the Indian languages: Chinese, Arabic, Vietnamese, Filipino, Samoan, Korean, Greek, Spanish, and Italian. Okay? And the Indian language groups is the fastest growing groups among younger students. Okay. Now, after learning about the language diversity of the student populations, I'll turn your attention to the language education provisions. Okay? Are they aligned with our student language diversity? Okay. So in early childhood learning settings, preschool can choose to enroll in one language with the Early Learning Languages Australia. This is like a play-based language learning app. So students will play the apps on an iPad or a tablet, and the teachers will just let them do with the app. So the idea is that the teachers does not, the room teachers does not have to know the language in order for the school to choose the language. So the most popular choices among the preschools are Chinese Mandarin, Spanish, French, Italian, and Japanese. Okay? Arabic is still there. Okay? Vietnamese is very, very low. Okay? Now, then the next thing is that preschools are mostly privately funded. Okay, so do Sydney students learn languages in school? The answer is yes and no. Okay, so in primary school, okay, that's languages are optional. Okay, and then in secondary school in New South Wales, they are only required to learn 100 hours of languages other than English, right? That could be any combination as the school make the arrangement. Okay, so in primary school, the most popular languages are Chinese, Arabic, Italian, Japanese, French, Vietnamese. Now, that looks a little bit more aligned with the student population diversity. Okay, and then you can see that the reason that they're actually doing this is that we can see there are a lot of community language school, and I would like to thank Chloe for and Crystal for supporting the creation of this map. There, okay, many of the learners primary school are learning language through community language school. So in 2020, more than 3,000 teachers teach 62 languages at 583 locations to more than 35,000 students. Well, there is a catch. The catch is that the schools are run after school hours or during weekends. Okay, now these are also optional to voluntary language education. The question is, what is happening in secondary school? Okay. In secondary school, they're called participation, okay, because they're not officially learning a language for an extended period of time. They're only required to participate in language educations for 100 hours. And the most popular one now, we see a shift, right, from more of the languages that align with the student own language diversity to Japanese, French, Mandarin, Italian, and Spanish. Okay? So that's from year 7 to year 8. Okay? Well, we can see that the enrollments, the participation rate gears towards the year 12 languages. Okay, and if we compare, for example, that Mandarin, of course, is one of the biggest, most commonly spoken language. Okay, so that aligns it. The second one, for example, Arabic. Okay, the total number of participations by student only 681, when there are more than 200,000 speakers. Cantonese is 0. Well, that was not categorized. There was only Chinese Mandarin mentioned in the school context. Vietnamese, 196 only. Greek, 474. So obviously the school curriculum, the school language curriculums do not match with the language diversity of the student. And for example, Indian languages are not features commonly in the school curriculum yet. Okay. Now, when they get to the year 12 final years, that if they want to sit for an exam, only 7.6% of New South Wales students take at least one language course. That is much lower than the national average of 10.3%. Okay. And the most commonly chosen languages in the last several years have been either Japanese or French. Okay. Students are taking Japanese and French in year 12, Chinese, Italian, Spanish, and then you have much lower numbers with other languages. When you see the pattern of, for example, the preschool and the primary school, there's some attempt to match that with the students' own language heritage or the language diversity of the communities. When it starts getting to the secondary school, that have the kind of more formalized language education, we move towards specific languages. Now, I have no disagreement with students taking Japanese and French, but we do observe a certain misalignment of the language diversity of the student and the language education provisions in school here, in the formal context. Okay, so a total of 2 languages. When we look at Vietnamese, we have 99,000 speakers. That's only for 2016 census. Okay. In New South Wales, only 221 of them have chosen to take the language. With Japanese speakers, a much smaller population, speech communities, 15,000 of them, but there are a lot more high school students taking the language, 1,399 in 2021. I would like to see an increase in every language subject. Okay, not the preference particularly, but we're pointing out the misalignment of that. Okay. So how can multilingualism be supported if there is a misalignment between the language diversity of the student and then the formal educations here? Okay. So when Michael Klein talks about Australia's language potential, it is actually important to put in mind that when he talks about the the monolingual mindset, which is almost like the first thing people mentioned when it comes to Australia in the context of language education, language maintenance. What they were saying is there's the failure to recognize language capability as an asset and to capitalize on it. So there is actually an important to think about that as an asset, you have economic value, social values, and cultural values of the languages. Okay. It's actually important to think about the value of languages. Earlier, I have introduced the visibility, access, capacities as lenses to understanding languages in a multicultural world. And these lenses can be used to imagine a language inclusive society. As a team in the Multilingualism Research Centers, we're working on language inclusion as defined as the process of improving multilingual people's engagement with and participations in society through language access, capacities, and visibility. And the argument is that English does not have to be the only measurement for equitable social participations and advancement. Okay. So now, let's recap. Okay. 56.2% of all Metropolitan Sydney government students come from language backgrounds other than English. Can we imagine a language inclusive society? Okay, is it possible? I'm just going to say absolutely. Okay. There's something else that was unimaginable in the past. I'm old enough to think about 3 examples. One is smoking ban in public space, in most public spaces. And then the other one is climate change activism. Okay? Nowadays, young people cannot imagine a time when there's no discussion of climate change. Right? We can think about it as the same way. And then the last one is actually even more recent, is that the easy streaming of multilingual TV and movies at home. How many of us have watched The Money Heist and Squid Games, and how many globally have watched these programs? And when I was young, it was almost impossible to think that, without going to a special film festival, that you can watch something other than Chinese or other than, I was in Hong Kong, in English. Okay? But now we turn on the TV, there's multilingual TV program. So absolutely, we can imagine a language inclusive society. Okay, these things were almost unimaginable 10 or 15 years ago, but now these are absolutely normalized, and these things happen because people take actions. So there will be implications for individuals when we wanted to think about a language inclusive multilingual society or language inclusion in a multicultural society. We have to imagine, we have to act, we have to advocate. Imagine, we have to think back, what would a truly inclusive multilingual society be like? Does it mean that everyone is learning languages? Is everyone open to other people speaking different languages? Do we have enough support for multilingual? Can we imagine a society that does not only talks about how good is your English, but can we ask, how good is your Arabic? How good is your Vietnamese? How good is your Chinese, French, Japanese, Italian, Greek? And then act, everyday multilingual acts. What can I do? What can my family, friends, and community do that will make a multilingual environment a normal thing and everyday practiced? When we turn on the TV, would it be possible to watch a Spanish TV program, a Korean TV program, play the song in a language other than English? And then finally, to advocate, be an activist, how to build an inclusive multilingual society. Advocate for others, not just for my language and my language communities, but for other people, everybody. Okay? So that when we think about languages, we're thinking of equitable participations here. So we wanted to think about language inclusion. We'll have to imagine, we have to act, and we have to advocate. So to conclude, the thinking about the value of languages in the multicultural world is that together we can do something. We have to do something to make our diverse world more language inclusive. Okay? For everybody to appreciate the value of languages. We can advocate for multilingualism. We can imagine a world that all languages are valuable so that future generations cannot possibly imagine a society that values only one language, because we can all imagine a better future for everybody. Okay. So thank you for joining me this morning, and I'm just going to stop here. Just going to stop sharing.
Thank you very much, Alice, for a very thought-provoking and an interesting opening to this conference. I really enjoyed your presentation, as I'm sure everybody did in the audience. We've got some time for questions and discussions, I think, now. Is that right, Chloe? Am I...
Yeah, that's right. So there's 15 minutes for questions and discussion about the talk, and then after that, people can either take a break or they can still stay around for the 15-minute sort of mingling, more casual session with Alice, and can ask her questions about the talk or other things about her career, etc.
Yeah. Thanks, Chloe. Yeah, if you've got questions or things you'd like to ask, might be easiest if you do the raise hand function on Zoom, and I can call on people as in the order that they put up their hands, if that's all right. Anyone like to get us started with any burning questions that you have?
I see that Amelia suggested Bessie Rhymes, 2021 Citizen Social Linguistics. Definitely follow up. Thank you for the suggestions.
I think lots of accolades coming in here in the chat. Yeah. I might, as we're waiting for people to frame their questions, or Phil's got a question here, so maybe we'll go to Phil. You might want to unmute yourself, Phil.
While people are thinking of questions, I did make a comment in the chat that occurred to me, Alice, while you were talking about our government's, you very nicely put together all of our government ministers' comments about English. In fact, I think it's a very tiny fraction of the population that doesn't speak English well. And I think mostly they're people who don't want to get a job because they are doing other things rather than going into the workforce. And I was just wondering why they spend so much time on that issue. And I wonder if it's, you know, because if you focus on the people who don't speak English well, then you don't have to think about, you know, how we can, these ideas about how we can live together as a people who speak lots of languages. We can keep, they can keep pushing forward that message that we all speak English. And sure, people speak other languages, but that's kind of their problem. It's not a problem for the society. It's not an issue. It's not a problem at all, but it's not an issue for the society as a whole. And I wonder if you think that might be the case, that they're kind of trying to push the discussion in one direction rather than the more productive one of multilingualism.
Ask the last question.
You could take that as a comment or a question, if you like.
I think they're more like a comment. I think I do agree that there is a lot of focus on just a small a small proportion of people who don't necessarily speak English well enough, and many of them, as you say, is that they may not necessarily want to go into workforce formally. But then, for example, we could be talking about grandparents who may be coming in to have very important family roles as the caretakers, for example. That do they necessarily need to speak English? Not necessarily. That they could pass on, they could be raising grandchildren in languages other than English. So that's interesting point about if you focus on people like who bang on that, like they don't speak English, so they're not integrating, then you don't really have to worry about, like, can we ask people who don't speak other languages to learn other languages? The other part is the questions. Okay.
Thanks, Alice. Yeah, that's good. Noor, I think, has a question. Would you like to unmute yourself?
Okay, thank you.
Yes, go. Yes,
yeah,
go
thank you, Peter. Okay. Thank you, Alice, for great presentations. I really enjoy your presentations. And this is maybe a different atmosphere with Indonesia. This is related to English speaking practice. So if the pre-service teachers doesn't have any experience to speak English with other people with English speaking countries, so this is very difficult, for Indonesians to practice English. Then I take notes from your explanations. This is related to informal learning. Yeah, maybe you may give examples, or is this as kind of possibilities if the informal learning atmosphere will give impact on learners. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah,
Alex?
thanks for that question. Actually, I do understand that what I talk about today is maybe more applicable to the Australian context, but very interestingly, when we think about the learning of languages, English included, in an informal context, it's could be a lot more important, particularly in the digital practices, because, for example, particularly in the last 2 years, that there may not be a lot more face-to-face possibility of doing English lessons or doing English practices there, then the online, particular, the digital space will allow that. And one of my PhD students have just finished a brilliant thesis on looking at how informal English practices from Vietnam, the Vietnamese university student, actually impact how they respond and how they act in university. Okay, so when we think about the teaching of languages, then we need to consider, so what do students do both inside and beyond the language classroom? But this is another area of thinking that Peter mentioned. That was another aspect of me. I'd like to split and talk about this for another 2 days, and that will be my excitement that's there. But we'll come back to that. But of course, the other possibility is also to think about translanguagings and for example, Sue Ollerhead's presentation later on in the conference will be a very interesting paper to attend as well there. Yep.
Thank you, Alice. Yeah, that's great. I've got a question from Mandy Scott from Canberra. I think you were next in the growing list of questioners.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, sorry, I'm appearing there as Canberra Multicultural Community Forum. Just a couple of comments really. So thank you so much, Alice. That was a great presentation. It's always a constant source of frustration to me. Here in Canberra, we have this National Multicultural Festival. Well, usually, we're not having it next year. But as you say, languages is just completely missing. We've tried for many years to get languages in there. But it's really interesting because people themselves don't really value their own languages. For example, I'm sitting now in the office of the Multicultural Forum, and we had an AGM, and several people have birthdays in December. So they said, let's sing happy birthday. So I said, well, let's everybody sing it in their own languages. And they just laughed embarrassedly and sang it in English. So then I sang it in Welsh. They said, what language is that? I said, Welsh. And so then all of a sudden we heard all these different languages, and they really enjoyed it. And we could get more of that into everyday type things in schools to make everybody aware that there are languages, but there's that initial, not embarrassment, but just sort of reluctance. And it takes 1 or 2 people to do something, and all of a sudden they really do enjoy it. And they say, oh, what language is that? These people are in a committee and they'd never asked somebody. We've got a couple of African members, for example. What language do you speak? Oh, languages they never heard of. Just one thing. So I think that would be perhaps a good way of doing things. But the other thing was the discussion about English, because again, there's always a lot of focus on the need to improve English skills. But to remember, when we talk about if you can speak English or not speak English, while the gatekeepers for higher education and jobs is standard Australian English and written English and a particular genre of written English, there is a need for that across the community, the migrant community and the English speaking community, because it keeps a lot of people out. So English is not a sort of a cover-all. You have to think of what kind of English and for what purposes. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you. I really love your example of that will be like really normalizing multilingualism as everyday practice. And I absolutely agree with the idea is that it's not just English. That's if we talk about just spoken everyday English for communications, I think a lot of people will not have any particular issue. But when you're looking at professionals or academic English, that's a totally different matter, right? Even for how term as native English speakers. That's a really different training, different discipline there. Thank you for that comment. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mandy. Yeah, and thanks, Alice. Katrina, I think you've got your hand up as well. Go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you again, Alice. I did a master's in TESOL about 4 or 5 years ago, and I'm sure in that we had a national policy like English was the official language, and they harked back to some act of parliament many, many years ago. I'd love some clarification on that.
To the best of my knowledge, that we do not, as a nation, have an official language. Now they are putting English as a national language on a lot of government websites, okay? but it's not an official language to the idea of excluding other languages.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, thanks, Katrina. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. Coming from Canada, as I do, it's very different in terms of the way languages are enshrined legally in Canada. It's that's a different discussion, of course. Yeah. Robin, you've got a question, I think, for Alice.
Thanks. Hi, Peter. Thank you so much, Alice. Fantastic presentation, just totally inspiring. And fits in with some of my work as well too. Just a couple of things, I suppose. The disparity between this, particularly secondary school languages and the actual representation of languages in the community. We can look to educational history and the kind of British legacy of what languages to teach that are educationally more valuable, you know, French and Latin. And economic rationales for, learn language to do trade with this country, which are very short-sighted and short-lived, those economic rationales. But I'm interested in changing. You can impact teachers and principals' perceptions of the languages actually in their schools. I think that's a really important area to think about and to work in, of changing both primary school and secondary school teachers' openness and understanding of the languages that the kids in their schools speak. And hey, you know, a unique idea that language learning is for using and for communicating in the here and now.
Yeah, actually, I think it's a really good point. I think it's a very good point to point out about the education history. And by no means, this is only limited to Australia. When we look at other countries, particularly English-speaking countries, and what are the languages educations being on offer, we have a very similar pictures there. And so it's by no means that I'm blaming Australia for only teaching French and Japanese, particularly, but there is a whole global pictures of what languages are more likely to be offered in school as well. And actually, it's a very good point to point out that interesting things to think about is if we are looking at thinking about trade and economics, for example, that Indonesians has been pushed for a number of years to be more commonly available in schools, because actually Indonesia is one of our biggest trade partners, and particularly in the Asia Pacific area region, that is actually important. But still, it's not being picked up, and some of the programs are being closed down in university as well. So it's actually quite interesting to think about that. And thank you to Meta to look at the social capital from a Purdue framework of looking at that as well there. Yes, it's actually that will be very important for parents, particularly, to push the languages, not just their languages, but what are the languages. And I think one thing that we also wanted to rethink that, and I'm still thinking through this point, is I would like everybody to turn our thinking more inward, that language learning is useful in the Australian context. We are not learning Italian so that we can go to Italy. That's nice. That's really nice. But we are learning it. We can be learning Italian so that we can talk to somebody, a grandma, grandpa, or an Italian-speaking person in Leichhardt. Okay, seriously. And so this is another point that I would like to push in the future, is to less Australian look inward, that languages have values in Australia, not just somewhere overseas, right? So yeah, but that will be another discussions. Yeah.
Comments, please. Thank you, Alice, for great presentation. I just, while you were saying, I was just wondering, I have experience over a decade here working within languages and the community language school space. And it's very interesting also to note that there are a number of teachers in the mainstream schools aware of our work that we do or languages, but I think it's also important, I think, to build kind of a different awareness of attitudes or appreciation towards languages, that students can be acknowledged in the mainstream schools as well. And I also think sometimes that it's in regards to parents, I speak with a lot of different parents from, who do have children, and they're trying absolutely their hardest to maintain and foster the language, that there is not sometimes enough, I'm not sure whether it's a support, but to build an awareness generally that it's okay to use another language, whether it's in the public space or even support the languages in the school libraries, or, for example, I was wondering why, and this is one of the things I wonder, we have the literacy program, the what is called the reading challenge, for example, the New South Wales Premier's Reading Challenge. And I sometimes wonder why we don't include any or recognize readers, children who read, for example, in other languages, in languages other than English.
That's actually a really good point. Like, we can start with the reading challenge. That if we can sneak in, if that's the word, sneak in languages and children's books in languages other than English, and that will be actually a really good starting point to normalize. I think that really is a really good thing to think about, is how can we normalize multilingual practices, whether we're speaking, writing, and reading in different languages. And the openness, the acceptance of that. And I think that is actually, I think everybody will have the experience of the frustration. But my really kind of optimistic and naive view is that we're going to be there one day. Maybe not today, maybe not immediately tomorrow, but soon, right? If we have the will to think, to imagine, to act, and to advocate. I think that is actually a really good point. To act, it could be just a simple thing of asking to include multilingual books as part of the Premier's Reading Challenge. It's a really good point. Let's push it. Maybe we can start with the New South Wales State Library. Come on.
I'm sorry, Jill and Alice. I think we've lost, our chair has become disconnected.
He's actually just come back.
I see. I think we should formally close this session now, because we have a parallel sessions are starting in 11:15. So people can take a short break if they need to. But we are going to leave the room open until 11:15 if anybody wants to continue to chat with Alice. But can we sorry, Peter, did you get
I'm sorry, my internet ended.
Okay, so I'm just ending the session.
Sorry about that.
I'm just ending the session formally and inviting anybody who wishes to continue, maybe Jill, just to stay here. But we have our parallel sessions, so please go to SCED at 11:15 promptly, so we can sort of stick to the time schedule and go into whichever parallel session.
Thank you for
Thanks, Phil. And I noticed there were a couple of questions in the chat that I was just about to go to before my internet dropped off. So if those of you want to stay and chat with Alice, you can ask your questions there, perhaps, or sometime during the conference. Yeah, thanks everyone, and thank you again, Alice, for a wonderful opening plenary. very much appreciated.
Thank you. Jill, yes.
Hello. The question I was going to ask is about one of the major disincentives to doing languages in Year 12 is the HSC scaling system, where learners are worried about losing marks because they're considered to be heritage speakers. And in terms of advocacy, what do you suggest we can do about this?
We have been lobbying, and I think different sectors and the language education sectors on board has been lobbying, and but it will be again slightly more difficult to get over that hurdle a little bit, and but we might be seeing changes because some other things that has been in the pipeline coming out. But I think that's actually a good point. I haven't mentioned that one because this really a little bit pessimistic at that point. Yes, but actually agree.
It absolutely needs to change.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, Abdullah.
Hi, Alice. Thank you for this informative presentation. I like it.
Thank you.
I have a question. How can minority languages be maintained?
That's actually an interesting question. They might, I mean, because basically it has to start with, for example, that do we have opportunity for setting up a community language school? That usually is a very good way of supporting families or community to be able to like start teaching the language school in the language school, and you will also have government support for that, right? So if you are particularly interested in that, email me and I'll give you more information about that, because it's actually more complicated than just like let's use the language in the family. But if we will be able to, for example, the language, the communities, and set up a community language school, that would be very, very helpful for that. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Matt. How are you?
Hi, Alice. Good. How are you?
Good.
I just wanted to make a quick comment about Greek and Italian, because in the history of these two languages in Australia, it's quite interesting the different way that they developed. Both sort of, you know, important migrant languages. But if we look at the education panorama in modern Greek in Australia, it's almost non-existent. Outside Greek families that promote Greek within the family and within the community schools. And I actually think there's a bit of work on this that I think is really interesting and shows how a language can open out and then, you know, become a language that's sort of, you know, in education and in other, I just think it's a really interesting thing, like when we're thinking about minority languages and that sort of thing. Because I think your comment about, we have to look at Australia, I think that's really important. I think it's important for the vitality of smaller languages that they both look in and out, because if you're not getting other people interested in the language, it just stays in that sort of community. I don't know if you've got a comment about that.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. But that's that point about looking in, like, you know, what languages are used in the community. Like, it's not just, for example, it's like we are in the city of Ryde, Macquarie, that, for example, Armenian is actually one of the top 5 languages most commonly spoken there. So yes, it will be quite interesting to learn something in, you know, to learn some phrases. Not, I know it's going to take years to become fluent or even like slightly there, but learning phrases, learning some vocabularies, a starting point for Armenians, that would be really, really interesting, because these are the people who live in my neighborhood, in the neighborhood that I work in.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Hi, Paula.
Hi, Alice. Great talk. I was just wondering, so we're talking about a lot about primary school, secondary school. So I have a feeling that this language shift to English from the community happens very, very early in life. You know, from 6 months, you can send your child to early learning centers or, you know, childcare centers. So if children are kind of bulletproof to speak their language from there, would they be the ones who actually initiate a change in schools because they are crying to continue education in primary schools and then secondary schools? So why can't we just nurture that? And I'm just advocating for my own program, right? So if anyone wants to see that, it's at 12 o'clock today.
Yeah. Actually, I think this is actually important because if we think about the parallel movement for climate change, for example,
I connected to that.
Yes, it's actually like young people, right? I mean, like I can't just say, well, you are learning that so that you can talk to, you know, older people. That's important, but more important is that because you wanted your children to learn languages, you want the young people to learn languages because they will be important. These skills will be important to the young people, right? Not to me as an older person, for the young person. Yes, like get them to be the advocate, to turn them into, say, demanding the government, like give us the language education that we deserve. Yeah. Good point.
Just blindly advocating for our article here, if anyone wants to have a look. It had lots of views.
Will be brilliant things to read. Yes, thank you.
I guess we've got the parallel sessions coming up, so I'm not sure if Chloe is probably going to close off this one, I think now, is that right?
Yeah.
Chloe?
Yeah, sure, I can. Okay. Yeah, so thank you so much, Alice. That was wonderful, so inspiring. It got me thinking, as I'm sure it has with lots of other people as well. And thank you, Peter, for chairing the session, and thank you to everyone for your attendance and great questions and conversation as well. So yeah, we'll now be closing this session. So this room will be closed. So if you'd like to go along to a parallel session, just go onto Scared, click on the session you're interested in, and then click on the enter session button and you'll be able to go in.
Yep. See you somewhere else.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Alice.
everyone.
Thank you, Alice. Thanks,
Thank you
Chloe.
so much.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.